The Brothers Grimm Fairy Tales. The King's Son Who Feared Nothing. There was once a king's son who was no longer content to stay at home in his father's house, and as he had no fear of anything, he thought, "I will go forth into the wide world. There the time will not seem long to me, and I shall see wonders enough." So he took leave of his parents and went forth, and on from morning till night, and whichever way his path led it was the same to him. It came to pass that he got to the house of a giant, and as he was so tired, he sat down by the door and rested. And as he let his eyes roam here and there, he saw the giant's playthings lying in the yard. These were a couple of enormous balls and 9 pins as tall as a man. After a while he had a fancy to set the 9 pins up, and then rolled the balls at them and screamed and cried out when the 9 pins fell, and had a merry time of it. The giant heard the noise, stretched his head out of the window, and saw a man who was not taller than other men, and yet played with his 9 pins. "Little worm," cried he, "why art thou playing with my balls? Who gave thee strength to do it?" The king's son looked up, saw the giant, and said, "O thou blockhead, thou thinkest indeed that thou only hast strong arms. I can do everything I want to do." The giant came down and watched the bowling with great admiration, and said, "Child of man, if thou art one of that kind, go and bring me an apple of the tree of life." "What dost thou want with it?" said the king's son. "I do not want the apple for myself," answered the giant, "but I have a betrothed bride who wishes for it. I have travelled far about the world, and cannot find the tree." "I will soon find it," said the king's son, "and I do not know what is to prevent me from getting the apple down." The giant said, "Thou really believest it to be so easy? The garden in which the tree stands is surrounded by an iron railing, and in front of the railing lie wild beasts, each close to the other, and they keep watch and let no man go in." "They will be sure to let me in," said the king's son. "Yes, but even if thou dost get into the garden, and seest the apple hanging to the tree, it is still not thine. A ring hangs in front of it, through which anyone who wants to reach the apple and break it off must put his hand, and no one has yet had the luck to do it." "That luck will be mine," said the king's son. Then he took leave of the giant, and went forth over mountain and valley, and through plains and forests, until at length he came to the wondrous garden. The beasts lay round about it, but they had put their heads down and were asleep. Moreover, they did not awake when he went up to them, so he stepped over them, climbed the fence, and got safely into the garden. There, in the very middle of it, stood the tree of life, and the red apples were shining upon the branches. He climbed up the trunk to the top, and as he was about to reach out for an apple, he saw a ring hanging before it, but he thrust his hand through that without any difficulty, and gathered the apple. The ring closed tightly on his arm, and all at once he felt a prodigious strength flowing through his veins. When he had come down again from the tree with the apple, he would not climb over the fence, but grasped the great gate, and had no need to shake it more than once before it sprang open with a loud crash. Then he went out, and the lion, which had been lying down before, was awake and sprang after him, not in rage and fierceness, but following him humbly as its master. The king's son took the giant the apple he had promised him, and said, "Seest thou, I have brought it without difficulty." The giant was glad that his desire had been so soon satisfied, hastened to his bride, and gave her the apple for which she had wished. She was a beautiful and wise maiden, and as she did not see the ring on his arm, she said, "I shall never believe that thou hast brought the apple until I see the ring on thine arm." The giant said, "I have nothing to do but go home and fetch it," and thought it would be easy to take away by force from the weak man what he would not give of his own free will. He therefore demanded the ring from him, but the king's son refused it. "Where the apple is, the ring must be also," said the giant. "If thou wilt not give it of thine own accord, thou must fight with me for it." They wrestled with each other for a long time, but the giant could not get the better of the king's son, who was strengthened by the magical power of the ring. Then the giant thought of a stratagem and said, "I have got warm with fighting, and so hast thou. We will bathe in the river and cool ourselves before we begin again." The king's son, who knew nothing of falsehood, went with him to the water and pulled off with his clothes the ring also from his arm and sprang into the river. The giant instantly snatched the ring and ran away with it, but the lion, which had observed the theft, pursued the giant, tore the ring out of his hand, and brought it back to its master. Then the giant placed himself behind an oak tree, and while the king's son was busy putting on his clothes again, surprised him and put both his eyes out. And now the unhappy king's son stood there and was blind and knew not how to help himself. Then the giant came back to him, took him by the hand as if he was someone who wanted to guide him, and led him to the top of a high rock. There he left him standing and thought, "Just 2 steps more and he will fall down and kill himself, and I can take the ring from him." But the faithful lion had not deserted its master. It held him fast by the clothes and drew him gradually back again. When the giant came and wanted to rob the dead man, he saw that his cunning had been in vain. "Is there no way then of destroying a weak child of man like that?" said he angrily to himself, and seized the king's son and led him back again to the precipice by another way. But the lion, which saw his evil design, helped its master out of danger here also. When they had got close to the edge, the giant let the blind man's hand drop and was going to leave him behind alone, but the lion pushed the giant so that he was thrown down and fell, dashed to pieces, on the ground. The faithful animal again drew its master back from the precipice and guided him to a tree by which flowed a clear brook. The king's son sat down there, but the lion lay down and sprinkled the water in his face with its paws. Scarcely had a couple of drops wetted the sockets of his eyes than he was once more able to see something, and remarked a little bird flying quite close by, which wounded itself against the trunk of a tree. On this it went down to the water and bathed itself therein, and then it soared upwards and swept between the trees without touching them, as if it had recovered its sight again. Then the king's son recognized a sign from God, and stooped down to the water and washed and bathed his face in it. And when he arose, he had his eyes once more, brighter and clearer than they had ever been. The king's son thanked God for his great mercy, and travelled with his lion onwards through the world. And it came to pass that he arrived before a castle which was enchanted. In the gateway stood a maiden of beautiful form and fine face, but she was quite black. She spoke to him and said, "Ah, if thou couldst but deliver me from the evil spell which is thrown over me." "What shall I do?" said the king's son. The maiden answered, "Thou must pass 3 nights in the great hall of this enchanted castle, but thou must let no fear enter thy heart. When they are doing their worst to torment thee, if thou bearest it without letting a sound escape thee, I shall be free. Thy life they dare not take." Then said the king's son, "I have no fear. With God's help I will try it." So he went gaily into the castle, and when it grew dark, he seated himself in the large hall and waited. Everything was quiet, however, till midnight, when all at once a great tumult began, and out of every hole and corner came little devils. They behaved as if they did not see him, seated themselves in the middle of the room, lighted a fire, and began to gamble. When one of them lost, he said, "It is not right. Someone is here who does not belong to us. It is his fault that I am losing." "Wait, you fellow behind the stove, I am coming," said another. The screaming became still louder, so that no one could have heard it without terror. The king's son stayed sitting quite quietly and was not afraid, but at last the devils jumped up from the ground and fell on him, and there were so many of them that he could not defend himself from them. They dragged him about on the floor, pinched him, pricked him, beat him, and tormented him, but no sound escaped from him. Towards morning they disappeared, and he was so exhausted that he could scarcely move his limbs. But when day dawned, the black maiden came to him. She bore in her hand a little bottle wherein was the water of life wherewith she washed him, and he at once felt all pain depart, and new strength flow through his veins. She said, "Thou hast held out successfully for one night, but 2 more lie before thee." Then she went away again, and as she was going, he observed that her feet had become white. The next night the devils came and began their gambols anew. They fell on the king's son and beat him much more severely than the night before, until his body was covered with wounds. But as he bore all quietly, they were forced to leave him. And when dawn appeared, the maiden came and healed him with the water of life. And when she went away, he saw with joy that she had already become white to the tips of her fingers. And now he had only 1 night more to go through, but it was the worst. The hobgoblins came again. "Art thou there still?" cried they. "Thou shalt be tormented till thy breath stops." They pricked him and beat him, and threw him here and there, and pulled him by the arms and legs as if they wanted to tear him to pieces, but he bore everything, and never uttered a cry. At last the devils vanished, but he lay fainting there and did not stir, nor could he raise his eyes to look at the maiden who came in, and sprinkled and bathed him with the water of life. But suddenly he was freed from all pain, and felt fresh and healthy as if he had awakened from sleep, and when he opened his eyes he saw the maiden standing by him, snow-white and fair as day. "Rise," said she, "and swing thy sword 3 times over the stairs, and then all will be delivered." And when he had done that, the whole castle was released from enchantment, and the maiden was a rich king's daughter. The servants came and said that the table was already set in the great hall, and dinner served up. Then they sat down and ate and drank together, and in the evening the wedding was solemnized with great rejoicings. The Devil and his Grandmother. There was a great war, and the king had many soldiers, but gave them small pay, so small that they could not live upon it. So 3 of them agreed among themselves to desert. One of them said to the others, "If we are caught, we shall be hanged on the gallows. How shall we manage it?" Another said, "Look at that great cornfield. If we were to hide ourselves there, no one could find us. The troops are not allowed to enter it, and tomorrow they are to march away." They crept into the corn, only the troops did not march away, but remained lying all round about it. They stayed in the corn for 2 days and 2 nights, and were so hungry that they all but died, but if they had come out, their death would have been certain. Then said they, "What is the use of our deserting if we have to perish miserably here?" But now a fiery dragon came flying through the air, and it came down to them and asked why they had concealed themselves there. They answered, "We are 3 soldiers who have deserted because the pay was so bad, and now we shall have to die of hunger if we stay here, or to dangle on the gallows if we go out." "If you will serve me for 7 years," said the dragon, "I will convey you through the army so that no one shall seize you." "We have no choice and are compelled to accept," they replied. Then the dragon caught hold of them with his claws and carried them away through the air over the army and put them down again on the earth far from it. But the dragon was no other than the devil. He gave them a small whip and said, "Whip with it and crack it, and then as much gold will spring up round about as you can wish for. Then you can live like great lords, keep horses, and drive your carriages, but when the 7 years have come to an end, you are my property." Then he put before them a book, which they were all 3 forced to sign. "I will, however, then set you a riddle," said he, "and if you can guess that, you shall be free, and released from my power." Then the dragon flew away from them, and they went away with their whip, had gold in plenty, ordered themselves rich apparel, and travelled about the world. Wherever they were, they lived in pleasure and magnificence, rode on horseback, drove in carriages, ate and drank, but did nothing wicked. The time slipped quickly away, and when the 7 years were coming to an end, 2 of them were terribly anxious and alarmed, but the 3rd took the affair easily and said, "Brothers, fear nothing, my head is sharp enough, I shall guess the riddle." They went out into the open country and sat down, and the 2 pulled sorrowful faces. Then an aged woman came up to them, who inquired why they were so sad. "Alas," said they, "how can that concern you? After all, you cannot help us." "Who knows," said she, "confide your trouble to me." So they told her that they had been the devil's servants for nearly 7 years, and that he had provided them with gold as plentifully as if it had been blackberries, but that they had sold themselves to him and were forfeited to him if at the end of the 7 years they could not guess a riddle. The old woman said, "If you are to be saved, one of you must go into the forest. There he will come to a fallen rock which looks like a little house. He must enter that, and then he will obtain help." The 2 melancholy ones thought to themselves, "That will still not save us," and stayed where they were. But the 3rd, the merry one, got up and walked on in the forest until he found the rock house. In the little house, however, a very aged woman was sitting, who was the devil's grandmother, and asked the soldier where he came from and what he wanted there. He told her everything that had happened, and as he pleased her well, she had pity on him, and said she would help him. She lifted up a great stone which lay above a cellar, and said, "Conceal thyself there, thou canst hear everything that is said here, only sit still and do not stir. When the dragon comes, I will question him about the riddle. He tells everything to me, so listen carefully to his answer." At 12 o'clock at night, the dragon came flying thither and asked for his dinner. The grandmother laid the table and served up food and drink, so that he was pleased, and they ate and drank together. In the course of conversation, she asked him what kind of a day he had had, and how many souls he had got. "Nothing went very well today," he answered, "but I have laid hold of 3 soldiers. I have them safe." "Indeed, 3 soldiers, that's something like, but they may escape you yet." The devil said mockingly, "They are mine. I will set them a riddle, which they will never in this world be able to guess." "What riddle is that?" she inquired. "I will tell you. In the great North Sea lies a dead dogfish, that shall be your roast meat, and the rib of a whale shall be your silver spoon, and a hollow old horse's hoof shall be your wine-glass." When the devil had gone to bed, the old grandmother raised up the stone and let out the soldier. "Hast thou paid particular attention to everything?" "Yes," said he, "I know enough, and will contrive to save myself." Then he had to go back another way, through the window, secretly and with all speed, to his companions. He told them how the devil had been overreached by the old grandmother, and how he had learned the answer to the riddle from him. Then they were all joyous and of good cheer, and took the whip and whipped so much gold for themselves that it ran all over the ground. When the 7 years had fully gone by, the devil came with the book, showed the signatures, and said, "I will take you with me to hell. There you shall have a meal. If you can guess what kind of roast meat you will have to eat, you shall be free and released from your bargain, and may keep the whip as well." Then the first soldier began and said, "In the great North Sea lies a dead dogfish that no doubt is the roast meat." The devil was angry and began to mutter, and asked the second, "But what will your spoon be?" "The rib of a whale, that is to be our silver spoon." The devil made a wry face, again growled, and said to the third, "And do you also know what your wine-glass is to be?" "An old horse's hoof is to be our wine-glass." Then the devil flew away with a loud cry, and had no more power over them, but the 3 kept the whip, whipped as much money for themselves with it as they wanted, and lived happily to their end. The Skilful Huntsman. There was once a young fellow who had learnt the trade of locksmith, and told his father he would now go out into the world and seek his fortune. "Very well," said the father, "I am quite content with that," and gave him some money for his journey. So he travelled about and looked for work. After a time he resolved not to follow the trade of locksmith any more, for he no longer liked it, but he took a fancy for hunting. Then there met him in his rambles a huntsman dressed in green, who asked whence he came and whither he was going. The youth said he was a locksmith's apprentice, but that the trade no longer pleased him, and he had a liking for huntsmanship. Would he teach it to him? "Oh yes," said the huntsman, "if thou wilt go with me." Then the young fellow went with him, bound himself to him for some years, and learnt the art of hunting. After this he wished to try his luck elsewhere, and the huntsman gave them nothing in the way of payment but an air gun, which had, however, this property, that it hit its mark without fail whenever he shot with it. Then he set out and found himself in a very large forest, which he could not get to the end of in one day. When evening came, he seated himself in a high tree in order to escape from the wild beasts. Towards midnight, It seemed to him as if a little light glimmered in the distance. Then he looked down through the branches towards it, and kept well in his mind where it was. But in the first place he took off his hat and threw it down in the direction of the light, so that he might go to the hat as a mark when he had descended. Then he got down and went to his hat, put it on again, and went straight forwards. The farther he went, the larger the light grew, and when he got close to it, he saw that it was an enormous fire, and that 3 giants were sitting by it, who had an ox on the spit, and were roasting it. Presently one of them said, "I must just taste if the meat will soon be fit to eat," and pulled a piece off, and was about to put it in his mouth, when the huntsman shot it out of his hand. "Well, really," said the giant, "if the wind has not blown the bit out of my hand," and helped himself to another. But when he was just about to bite into it, the huntsman again shot it away from him. On this, the giant gave the one who was sitting next him a box on the ear, and cried angrily, "Why art thou snatching my piece away from me?" "I have not snatched it away," said the other. "A sharpshooter must have shot it away from thee." The giant took another piece, but could not, however, keep it in his hand, for the huntsman shot it out. Then the giant said, "That must be a good shot to shoot the bit out of one's very mouth. Such an one would be useful to us." And he cried aloud, "Come here, thou sharpshooter, seat thyself at the fire beside us, and eat thy fill. We will not hurt thee, but if thou wilt not come, and we have to bring thee by force, thou art a lost man." On this the youth went up to them and told them he was a skilled huntsman, and that whatever he aimed at with his gun he was certain to hit. Then they said if he would go with them he should be well treated, and they told him that outside the forest there was a great lake, behind which stood a tower, and in the tower was imprisoned a lovely princess, whom they wished very much to carry off. "Yes," said he, "I will soon get her for you." Then they added, "But there is still something else. There is a tiny little dog which begins to bark directly anyone goes near, and as soon as it barks everyone in the royal palace wakens up, and for this reason we cannot get there. Canst thou undertake to shoot it dead?" "Yes," said he, "that will be a little bit of fun for me." After this he got into a boat and rowed over the lake, and as soon as he landed the little dog came running out and was about to bark, but the huntsman took his air-gun and shot it dead. When the giants saw that, they rejoiced and thought they already had the king's daughter safe, but the huntsman wished first to see how matters stood, and told them that they must stay outside until he called them. Then he went into the castle, and all was perfectly quiet within, and every one was asleep. When he opened the door of the first room, a sword was hanging on the wall, which was made of pure silver, and there was a golden star on it, and the name of the king, and on a table near it lay a sealed letter, which he broke open, and inside it was written that whosoever had the sword could kill everything which opposed him. So he took the sword from the wall, hung it at his side, and went onwards. Then he entered the room where the king's daughter was lying sleeping, and she was so beautiful that he stood still and, holding his breath, looked at her. He thought to himself, "How can I give an innocent maiden into the power of the wild giants, who have evil in their minds?" He looked about further, and under the bed stood a pair of slippers. On the right one was her father's name with a star, and on the left her own name with a star. She wore also a great neck kerchief of silk embroidered with gold, and on the right side was her father's name, and on the left her own, all in golden letters. Then the huntsman took a pair of scissors and cut the right corner off, and put it in his knapsack, and then he also took the right slipper with the king's name, and thrust that in. Now the maiden still lay sleeping, and she was quite sewn into her night-dress, and he cut a morsel from this also, and thrust it in with the rest, but he did all without touching her. Then he went forth and left her lying asleep undisturbed, and when he came to the gate again, the giants were still standing outside, waiting for him, and expecting that he was bringing the princess. But he cried to them that they were to come in, for the maiden was already in their power, that he could not open the gate to them, but there was a hole through which they must creep. Then the first approached, and the huntsman wound the giant's hair round his hand, pulled the head in, and cut it off at one stroke with his sword, and then drew the rest of him in. He called to the second, and cut his head off likewise, and then he killed the third also, and he was well pleased that he had freed the beautiful maiden from her enemies, and he cut out their tongues, and put them in his knapsack. Then thought he, I will go home to my father, and let him see what I have already done, and afterwards I will travel about the world. The luck which God is pleased to grant me will easily find me. But when the king in the castle awoke, he saw the three giants lying there dead. So he went into the sleeping room of his daughter, awoke her, and asked, Who could have killed the giants? Then said she, Dear father, I know not, I have been asleep. But when she arose and would have put on her slippers, the right one was gone. And when she looked at her neck kerchief, it was cut, and the right corner was missing. And when she looked at her night-dress, a piece was cut out of it. The king summoned his whole court together, soldiers and everyone else who was there, and asked who had set his daughter at liberty and killed the giant. Now it happened that he had a captain who was one-eyed and a hideous man, and he said that he had done it. Then the old king said that as he had accomplished this, he should marry his daughter. But the maiden said, Rather than marry him, dear father, I will go away into the world as far as my legs can carry me. But the king said that if she would not marry him, she should take off her royal garments and wear peasant's clothing and go forth, and that she should go to a potter and begin a trade in earthen vessels. So she put off her royal apparel and went to a potter and borrowed crockery enough for a stall, and she promised him also that if she had sold it by the evening, she would pay for it. Then the king said she was to seat herself in a corner with it and sell it, and he arranged with some peasants to drive over it with their carts, so that everything should be broken into 1,000 pieces. When therefore the king's daughter had placed her stall in the street, by came the carts, and broke all she had into tiny fragments. She began to weep and said, Alas, how shall I ever pay for the pots now? The king had, however, wished by this to force her to marry the captain, but instead of that she again went to the potter and asked him if he would lend to her once more. He said no. She must first pay for the things she had already had. Then she went to her father and cried and lamented, and said she would go forth into the world. Then said he, I will have a little hut built for thee in the forest outside, and in it thou shalt stay all thy life long, and cook for everyone, but thou shalt take no money for it. When the hut was ready, a sign was hung on the door, whereon was written, Today given, tomorrow sold. There she remained a long time, and it was rumoured about the world that a maiden was there who cooked without asking for payment, and that this was set forth on a sign outside her door. The huntsman heard it likewise, and thought to himself, "That would suit thee. Thou art poor, and hast no money." So he took his air-gun and his knapsack, wherein all the things which he had formerly carried away with him from the castle as tokens of his truthfulness were still lying, and went into the forest, and found the hut with the sign, "Today given, tomorrow sold." He had put on the sword with which he had cut off the heads of the 3 giants, and thus entered the hut, and ordered something to eat to be given to him. He was charmed with the beautiful maiden, who was indeed as lovely as any picture. She asked him whence he came and whither he was going, and he said, "I am roaming about the world." Then she asked him where he had got the sword, for that truly her father's name was on it. He asked her if she were the king's daughter. "Yes," answered she. "With this sword," said he, "did I cut off the heads of 3 giants." And he took their tongues out of his knapsack in proof. Then he also showed her the slipper and the corner of the neck kerchief and the bit of the night-dress. Hereupon she was overjoyed, and said that he was the one who had delivered her. On this they went together to the old king, and fetched him to the hut, and she led him into her room, and told him that the huntsman was the man who had really set her free from the giants. And when the aged king saw all the proofs of this, he could no longer doubt, and said that he was very glad he knew how everything had happened, and that the huntsman should have her to wife, on which the maiden was glad at heart. Then she dressed the huntsman as if he were a foreign lord, and the king ordered a feast to be prepared. When they went to table, the captain sat on the left side of the king's daughter, but the huntsman was on the right, and the captain thought he was a foreign lord who had come on a visit. When they had eaten and drunk, the old king said to the captain that he would set before him something which he must guess. Supposing anyone said that he had killed the 3 giants, and he were asked where the giants' tongues were, and he were forced to go and look, and there were none in their heads, how could that happen? The captain said, "Then they cannot have had any." "Not so," said the king. "Every animal has a tongue." And then he likewise asked what anyone would deserve who made such an answer. The captain replied, "He ought to be torn in pieces." Then the king said he had pronounced his own sentence, and the captain was put in prison and then torn in 4 pieces, but the king's daughter was married to the huntsman. After this he brought his father and mother, and they lived with their son in happiness. And after the death of the old king he received the kingdom.